Imagine this glittering ancient world, right? Bronze everywhere, powerful kingdoms all linked up, trading goods, ideas, tech. I mean, their whole societies were woven together.
A real network.
Exactly. And then, bam! It's like the lights just go out, palaces crumbled, trade stops dead, whole civilizations, poof, vanished. What on earth happened?
It's one of history's great mysteries, isn't it?
It really is. So today on the Deep Dive, we're diving headfirst into that mystery, the Bronze Age collapse. We want to figure out, what caused such devastation, and maybe, just maybe, what it tells us about our own world today.
Yeah, because the fragility of complex systems, well, that's a timeless theme.
Absolutely. And here at the Deep Dive, we really get into these fascinating, kind of murky periods of history. We look at the latest findings, the old theories, try to piece it all together.
And you've pulled together some great sources for this one. We've got historical accounts, archaeological data, climate stuff, even genetics.
Yeah, it's quite a mix. So our mission today is really to unpack the main reasons behind this collapse.
Yeah.
We'll be looking at the environment, society, even how people moved around based on everything you've shared.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Yeah. Okay, let's set the scene. We're talking late Bronze Age, right? Roughly 13th, 12th centuries BCE. And it wasn't just scattered kingdoms doing their own thing.
No, not at all. The sources paint this picture of a really interconnected world. Think Hittites, Egyptians, Mycenaeans in Greece, others.
And they were talking to each other, trading.
Oh, absolutely. Diplomacy, complex trade routes, sharing technologies. It really was like an early form of globalization in a way.
Huh. A Bronze Age global network.
Pretty much. And that interconnectedness, while it brought prosperity, also created vulnerabilities. They depended on each other.
Like a modern supply chain, kind of. If one part breaks.
Exactly. A disruption in one corner could send shockwaves through the whole system, and it looks like a massive disruption did hit.
Right. Drought seems to be a huge piece of the puzzle here. The sources talk about really severe, prolonged droughts hitting the eastern Mediterranean, late 13th, early 12th centuries BCE.
Yeah, this wasn't just a dry summer. The paleoclimatic evidence is pretty compelling.
Like what kind of evidence are we talking about?
Well, you've got tree rings from Anatolia, modern Turkey, showing years, decades even, of really low rainfall.
Wow, decades.
Then you look at ancient pollen records from the Levant. They show a shift in vegetation, plants that thrive in drier conditions taking over.
Okay.
And lake sediments, too. From Cyprus, the Dead Sea, they tell a similar story. Less water flowing in, changes in the sediment layers. It all points to a major long-term arid period.
And it wasn't just scientists figuring this out later. People at the time knew something was wrong, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned Hittite and Egyptian records.
Yes, exactly. We have actual text from the time, clay tablets and inscriptions talking about grain shortages, appealing for shipments, the Hittite king writing to Egypt asking for grain. That tells you things were bad.
So people were actually starving.
It certainly looks that way. These droughts would have meant failed harvests, year after year, leading to famine, widespread food insecurity.
And desperate people do desperate things.
Right. You'd expect depopulation in some areas, people migrating en masse searching for food and water, internal strife breaking out as resources dwindled.
And what about those trade routes we mentioned?
They'd become incredibly unstable, dangerous even, or just empty. Settlements that relied on trade would have been devastated. Look at Emar in Syria, a thriving hub, then suddenly abandoned.
Just gone.
You can almost picture it, the silence falling over a once bustling city. It really highlights the scale of the crisis.
So the drought is a huge trigger, but the sources stress it wasn't just that, it was more like a perfect storm, a convergence of crises.
Precisely. The environmental stress was immense, but it combined with and likely caused serious economic problems. Economic disintegration is another key theme.
How so? What broke down economically?
Well, think about the Bronze Age. What do you need for bronze?
Copper and tin.
Right. Copper was relatively available, say, from Cyprus, but tin. That often had to come from much further away, maybe Afghanistan or even further west.
So those long-distance trade routes were crucial.
Absolutely vital. When those routes were disrupted by drought, famine, unrest, maybe piracy, the supply of tin could dry up?
No tin, no bronze.
Pretty much. Which means no new tools, no weapons, industries grind to a halt, artisans are out of work, the economic engine seizes up.
And that puts massive pressure on the rulers, I imagine. People are starving, the economy is collapsing.
Yeah, you've got increasingly desperate populations and rulers struggling to maintain control, maybe fighting amongst themselves for dwindling resources. It's a recipe for political collapse.
Now, you also share some sources that talk about societal collapse more generally, not just this specific instance.
Right. There's this idea that collapse isn't just something that happens to giant, complex empires. Even simpler societies can experience shifts in complexity, sometimes quite rapidly.
So collapse doesn't always mean, like, total annihilation, Mad Max style.
Not necessarily. It can mean a significant simplification. Maybe large states break down into smaller regional powers. Maybe cities shrink or are abandoned. Maybe people shift from farming back to herding. There's a loss of that high-level organization and specialization.
That makes sense. And one source mentioned something quite chilling, that civilizations are inherently fragile, impermanent.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought, isn't it? It definitely makes you look at our own complex world and wonder about its underlying stability.
For sure. Is there a theory for why they become fragile?
Well, one framework suggests that as societies get more complex, the cost of maintaining that complexity keeps going up. You need more bureaucracy, bigger armies, fancier infrastructure.
Why?
But the benefits that complexity provides to the average person might start to level off or even decline. So you're paying more and more, maybe through taxes or labor, for diminishing returns.
Like a point of inefficiency is reached.
Yeah. Sort of. The system becomes top-heavy, maybe more rigid, and then when a major stressor hits like this mega-drought in the Bronze Age, the whole structure is too strained, too costly to maintain, and it starts to unravel. The costs outweigh the benefits of staying complex.
So their own success, their complexity, kind of sowed the seeds of their vulnerability.
That's one way to look at it, yeah. Okay, now let's bring in something really cutting edge. Genetics. You shared this fascinating study on ancient DNA from the southern Levant.
Right, the genomic history study. How does looking at DNA help us understand a societal collapse that happened over 3,000 years ago?
It gives us a direct window into the people themselves. Who were they? Where did they come from? Did populations change dramatically during this chaotic period?
So what did they find? They looked at DNA from dozens of individuals?
93 individuals, yeah, spanning the period from before the main collapse into the early Iron Age, across sites in modern-day Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, people associated with Canaanite culture.
Were they all different, or?
Surprisingly, no. They found a lot of genetic similarity across these different sites. There were some subtle differences, like maybe coastal versus inland, but generally it suggests a fairly connected population group, genetically speaking.
Huh. So even as kingdoms were rising and falling, maybe the underlying population had more continuity than we thought.
It seems that way, at least in this region. The study also looked at their deeper ancestry.
Where did these Bronze Age Canaanites come from?
Their DNA was a mix. Part of it came from the local people who'd been there since the Neolithic, the first farmers, but another significant chunk came from populations further northeast.
Northeast, like where?
Places related to the Zagros Mountains, sort of modern-day Iran, and maybe the Caucasus region. It looks like there was migration from that direction into the Levant happening over a long period, maybe between 2500 and 1000 BCE.
So not one big invasion, but a more gradual mixing over centuries.
That's what the genetic data suggests, a long-term flow of people and genes shaping the Bronze Age population.
And does this ancient ancestry connect to people today?
Very much so. The study found that these Bronze Age Levantine groups contributed a really substantial amount of ancestry, like 50% or more, to basically all present-day groups in the Levant.
Wow. So both Jewish and Levantine Arabic-speaking populations today share a lot of ancestry tracing back to these Bronze Age people.
Exactly. It points to a deep genetic continuity in the region, despite all the historical and cultural changes over millennia.
That's incredible. Did the study find any evidence of population shifts before the big late Bronze Age collapse?
Yes, it did. They saw evidence of some population turnover between the earlier Chalcolithic period and the Bronze Age.
What does that mean?
It suggests there were already disruptions and changes happening, maybe smaller-scale migrations or societal shifts, even before the major collapse around 1200 BCE. That lines up with some archaeological evidence, too, showing cultural changes. So the region wasn't static before the big crisis hit.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together. It really sounds like the Bronze Age collapse wasn't just one thing. Not just drought, not just invaders, not just economic failure.
No, definitely not. The consensus now, based on all this evidence, is that it was a complex interplay, a convergence of factors.
The environmental crisis, the drought, seems like a massive catalyst weakening everything.
Absolutely. It stressed the agricultural base, leading to famine and unrest. That, in turn, crippled the interconnected economic system. The trade routes failed, industries collapsed.
And this likely fueled social unrest, migrations, maybe conflicts,
Mm.
all hitting these complex, perhaps overly stretched societies at the same time.
Exactly. It was a systemic failure. The different pressures magnified each other, pushing these civilizations past their breaking point.
It's a fascinating, if grim, picture. If you're finding this deep dive into the Bronze Age collapse as intriguing as we are, do take a second to like and subscribe. It really helps us keep doing these in-depth explorations.
Yeah, your support means a lot. So, thinking about the key takeaways, what stands out?
Well, first, just how sophisticated and interconnected that world was, maybe more like ours than we imagine.
Right. And second, how vulnerable that interconnectedness made them when a major prolonged crisis like the drought hit. The environmental factor seems crucial.
And that led to societal and economic breakdown on a huge scale. But also, the genetic story is amazing, showing this underlying continuity of people in the Levant through it all.
It adds a whole new layer, doesn't it? We get a glimpse of the actual people living through this dramatic period and their connection to populations today.
Definitely. And thinking about that fragility, it really makes you reflect on our own time, doesn't it? Our own complex, globalized system.
It absolutely does. We face our own challenges: climate change, economic instability, reliance on complex supply chains. Are there parallels?
It feels like there might be. The Bronze Age collapse is a stark reminder, maybe, that complexity and advancement don't equal invincibility. Systems can fail.
That really leads to the final thought, doesn't it? The Bronze Age collapse shows how multiple crises converging a perfect storm can bring down even advanced societies. So the provocative question for you listening is, what are the potential perfect storms brewing in our world today? And, well, are we truly prepared if multiple crises hit at once?
That's definitely something to chew on. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that or any other questions you have about the Bronze Age collapse. Let us know in the comments below. And, of course, subscribe to The Deep Dive for more explorations of the past and what it might teach us about today.